Stephen Hughes was born in London and moved to Australia in 1997. Stephen lives in Brisbane and for many years has been a member of the Christadelphian Church or ecclesia at North Brisbane. Stephen has a PhD in physics from King's College London and for over 15 years has taught astrophysics at the Queensland University of Technology. In the October and November 2021 Christadelphian Magazine, they published a two-part article written by Stephen entitled, "Why I Don't Believe." Stephen joins Wilderness Conversations to discuss what he doesn't believe. So Stephen, you are a Christian who is a scientist. Some people wonder if a scientist can believe in God.
Yes, I think, Steve, probably a lot of people would think that virtually every scientist believes in evolution or doesn't believe in God, which actually is not the case, although probably the vast majority of scientists would believe in evolution. Some of those would believe in God as the kind of orchestrator of evolution, evolutionary creationism or theistic evolution. In fact, I've been listening to the podcast you've done on that subject by various speakers over the last just over the last week. So I would say I'm one of those exceptions. I'm a scientist. I'm a physicist, an experimental physicist by training and profession, and so this is my particular slant on the subject in that article.
The article's called "Why I Don't Believe." Probably a slightly challenging topic, given that it's in a Christadelphian magazine. What is it that you don't believe?
Well, I suppose I was being deliberately slightly controversial because I would actually I call myself an evolutionary atheist. So in the same way that people are atheists who don't believe in God, I'm a fervent non-believer in evolution. And to me, it's not so much a religious question. In fact, I never really look at the problems with doctrine. Like I know some of the people you've interviewed have actually looked at there's serious issues with what the Bible teaches about the atonement, about salvation through the Lord Jesus Christ, and the BASF that Christadelphian beliefs are based on. I never actually get that far because for me, from a scientific point of view, I don't believe evolution is possible. And I explore the reasons in that two-part series.
One of the challenge you throw down with the question, why I don't believe, is some people would assume that someone who believes in the Bible or believes that God exists or believes there was a creation, but if you accept evolution, that's not a belief, it's scientific fact, like it's different to belief.
Yeah, that's right.
But I guess what you're saying here is belief in evolution is no different to any other belief that we might have.
Well, yes, you're quite right, Steve. I would actually go as far as, this would be controversial for many people, putting it in a faith-based category. That you have faith that these things happened in the past, because something else I came across, it might have been, in fact, in one of your podcasts, where someone was talking about different types of science. There's historic science and there's the science of the everyday, how computers work, how planes fly. And the hallmark of experimental science, which I'm very much involved in, is doing experiments and actually writing down a record of those experiments in scientific journals. And you need to put in enough information so someone else on the other side of the world can replicate the results you've got. And often ideas and theories have got into trouble because people have been unable to replicate what's been presented in a paper. Sometimes it's because of fraud. Sometimes it's just because of some kind of, I suppose, little fluke that happened during an experiment that people can't replicate. But the idea, so with science, you design, you perform an experiment, you get the results. I mean, being a physicist, it's numbers, and they've got errors and that kind of thing. And you use the information or the data that you've discovered or you've observed, and then you use that to come up or to test a theory. Now, with evolution, that of course is not possible, because it's not possible to climb into a TARDIS-like structure and go back for 0.5 billion years to look at the formation of the Earth and to see what happened.
So you can't observe it and you can't replicate it.
No, you can't observe it. No, that's right. Although people have tried to do experiments. In the article, I talk about the famous Miller-Urey experiment. Was that 1953?
1952, yeah. I want to get to that, so we'll come to that in a second. At the beginning of the article, you make reference to, I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, abiogenesis?
Abiogenesis, yeah.
Abiogenesis. And you make the distinction between that and evolution. Why do you make that distinction?
I'm not sure if it's a distinction. Well, what often in evolutionary theory, the big problem that people acknowledge is, how does life come from non-life? Or how do you get organic material? Organic means it's generated by life, and nearly all organic chemicals, I'm not an expert on this, but they all have carbon. And you've got inorganic chemicals, which are things which are just derived from natural processes, chemical processes which happen in the earth. So that's the difference. So that is, and I think evolutionists would acknowledge that is the fundamental problem. How do you actually get even very, very primitive life forms? So that's the genesis of life. How do you get that from just natural processes where there is no life? So biogenesis is really something which comes out from non-living material, living things from things which are non-living.
So it's almost a discussion you've got to almost have that discussion before you even talk about evolution.
That's right. That's right. Although I just don't think evolution works, but the first major hurdle, as you've just intimated at, is to get something which is capable of actually multiplying, because organisms have got to multiply, and there's got to be the information which encodes the next generation, the genetic code, and there has to be the possibility of errors occurring, which then get passed on to the new offspring. And those errors, some of them have to be beneficial for an organism to actually kind of progress up the tree of life, as they call it. So really, I suppose you could divide evolutionary theory up into two parts. The first one is the problem of abiogenesis. How do you get something from something which is not living? And then that's probably the most difficult part. And then you've got the next part, where you've got changes to a genetic code, which produces sort of, if you excuse the expression, souped up models.
Yeah, more complex life. Yeah,
but are able to survive. I mean, to my mind, there's serious issues with that, which I address in the article.
Before we get into the DNA, which is kind of the genetic code, which is the main part of the first article anyway, you talk about something quite interesting right at the beginning, and this idea of the fact or you mentioned that there's a sense in which the Word of God is inside us. Do you want to just talk us through that a little bit? It was an interesting idea, I thought.
Yeah, that's right. And I suppose the inspiration for that was in Psalm 139.
Do you want me to read it out? I've got it here. Do you want me to read it out?
Yeah, thanks, yeah.
Psalm 39, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvellous are thy works, that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret, and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. So it's Psalm 139, verses 14 to 16.
Yeah, so the way that's written, especially with the word book, and David talking about his members, and I think this actually relates to something called morphogenesis, which I don't specifically address in the articles, but that is a major challenge to science, and that is where you've got a single cell. So in case of human beings, you've got the egg and the sperm coming together, and so you've got that single cell. After a few hours, it divides. You've got 2 cells, then 4, 8, and it goes on like that. But as a baby develops in the womb, the cells actually change their type from stem cells into different cells. So it's cell differentiation. So you get nerve cells, you get muscle cells, you get the special muscle cells which make up the heart. You've got kidney cells, all these different cells. And a huge problem, if you look at this up, is how do the cells know what type of cell to change into in the particular position in the embryo? How do they know that? In fact, all sorts of theories, a series of morphogenic fields. The physicist Paul Davies talks about God's blueprint, and people acknowledge, even those that believe in evolution, that is a major problem. How do we get a fully functioning human being, a baby, after a period of 9 months, and it starts with a single cell? And that in itself, that's a major challenge. And what is really quite I find incredible is the fact that we've got all the information required for the formation of a baby in only 750 megabytes. Now, I say only, that's a lot of information. To try and make it more concrete in the article, I work out that that's equivalent to 135 complete works of Shakespeare. If I checked on our shelf at home, we've got the complete works of Shakespeare. Had to sort of read some of it at school, and it's 6 centimeters thick, and that's actually quite a thin, thin paper. The complete works of Shakespeare, you're not going to read that in 10 minutes. There's quite a lot written down, and we've got, I think I said 135 complete works of Shakespeare. That's what the genetic code is equivalent to if you work out the basic information. Of course, it's not written with letters like A, B, C, D. It's written with 4 amino acids. That sequence, that's what makes the letters of the genetic code. So it's a lot of information. If it was in a library, if it was like books, the complete works of Shakespeare, it would be 8 meters of bookshelf. 8 meters. Now, we take it for granted. You pick up any book or any form, even just a leaflet or something, or brochure, we don't doubt that a human being wrote that.
Right, it's not there by chance or by trial and error.
No, it's not. And so my thing is, how on earth could the equivalent of 135 complete works of Shakespeare, or I think 3 Encyclopedia Britannicas, which is 32, I haven't actually got that, but that's 32 volumes. So if you take the information in that least the word information. It's 3 times that. That's what we've got. Now that's a huge amount of information. But one thing I do in the article, I actually compare that with, say, a computer program, Microsoft Word, which I used to write the program on a MacBook Air. The version on the computer I used to write this article is 2.23 gigabytes, which is 3 times the size of the human genome. Now, Word is a very impressive program. I think most of us use it, but that really pales next to the program of the genetic code.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's 2 sides to this, isn't there? There's one side, as you're saying, there's this enormous amount of information, but in another sense, the information is also incredibly compact.
Yeah, it's incredibly efficient, because with the human genome, it's not only the instructions like hair color, eye color, all that kind of thing, I don't know, size of nose or ears, but it contains all of the information for the manufacturing of a baby. In fact, the inspiration for this article, it kind of started. A friend of mine, Jeff Pitt, you might know, down in South Australia, he's got a factory, and as well as being full of lots of human workers, there's lots of robots in the factory, and you see all this, lightning sparks with spot welders going, and these big barriers come down to protect the workers. And Jeff was showing me a video of a machine that he built. I think it's for stacking wine casks with a robot, and I think it empties them out and that. And an enormous amount of work goes into programming these robots. And in the article, there's a picture of robots making cars in a car factory, and a huge amount of effort goes into programming those robots to make cars. Very, very complicated computer programs. And you can imagine if those programs were not done correctly, if there was an error, it'd be highly destructive. They would destroy each other. So a lot of effort goes into writing that code. So I think with the human genome, it's not just a book. Now, a book, of course, that takes a lot of effort. In the article, I mentioned that in last year, I signed up for masterclass. In fact, I've continued with the subscription. They've got all these sort of experts in different fields, and I've been looking at some of the classes done by writers, and they all say it takes a lot of work to write something, a lot of research. It can take years and years. So it's not just the ability to throw words down on a page doesn't produce a great work of literature. And if you consider the human genome, I mean, how great a work of literature is that? It's not just like words on a page. It's more like a computer program. And what's really incredible is that a human baby is formed in the womb. The baby's born, it grows up in the adult, and then life carries on. That baby, male or female, would have children. And so when a baby's born, it's got all of the information and all the programming required for progeny. So it really is quite incredible. So I was really quite amazed myself when I noted that the human genome is 1/3 of the size of Microsoft Word, and yet it can do so much more. So it really is quite incredible. So to me, I just don't believe that writing, which is a form of the word of God because it came from God, I don't believe it's possible for that to be just written by random process.
In the article, you compare the complete works of William Shakespeare times 6 or whatever with just the mission statement of IKEA. I was curious as to why you chose the mission statement of IKEA, but nonetheless, and then just how long it would take to create that by chance, just by throwing letters together. I thought that was quite interesting.
That's right, because I think people often, they fail to appreciate just how quickly something increases in complexity. You just throwing a dice, you don't need many dice throws before you've got millions and millions of combinations. So that's all permutations. So that's what I did in the article. Did this calculation. I just why did I choose IKEA?
You're probably building something from IKEA.
Well, I was actually buying lots of stuff from IKEA.
I think you worked out that by doing it by random, I think a letter a second, and even if you could check it, which is a whole other story, and that is how do you check whether it's right or wrong, but put that aside. I think you worked out that it would take 10 to the power of 67 years for you to end up with a mission statement that equals that of IKEA, which is just a few words.
That's right.
A few words long.
Yeah. And the reason for mentioning that, there is this argument or an idea called the infinite monkey theorem, which is in the article, and I think there's a whole wiki page on that, and that's I suppose that's where I got the idea of comparing the human genome with the complete works of Shakespeare. So the idea is that if you set up gazillions of typewriters with monkeys there, I presume you have some sort of monkey training going on, because I don't know if monkeys could actually just type on a typewriter.
Assuming they can, I suppose.
Done any research on that? Yeah, and that means if, in principle, if you could have any number of monkeys typing away, that eventually one of them would type the complete works of Shakespeare. But I don't even believe that, because in the real universe, that's not going to work. You just can't do that, because you've got the energy, you've got all the food for the monkeys.
Let me ask the question though, because I think it's a question. It's a question that a lot of people have. Sits in the back of even believers' minds, I think, to some extent sometimes. But it's certainly something you'll hear on the street. And that is, if you've got an infinite amount of time, then even the most implausible thing, the most random thing will eventually happen. But of course, we actually don't have an infinite amount of time. If I understand correctly, even if you allow 14 billion years, of a universe, if that's how old it is, and that's probably on the outside, 20 billion years, whatever, you're nowhere close to even having a shot at getting even the IKEA mission statement, let alone the works of William Shakespeare.
No, that's right. And to me, a real killer for the theory of evolution is the what I call the energy.
That's what you talk about in the second article. Before we get onto that, I did want to ask you about genetic algorithms.
Okay, so what it is, these have been going for a number of years, I suppose, back to the relatively early days of computing. It's an idea taken from biological evolution. The idea is you produce a computer program, for example, generating an aircraft, where you can have the aircraft with different shaped wings, different engine design, a different fuselage shape. And so what you do, the computer assembles the aircraft. For example, this is just an example I read about years ago. And then in the computer simulation, the plane, say, gets given a certain amount of fuel, and it then undergoes a simulated flight. And it will go so far depending on the efficiency of the design, the wings, the engine, all that kind of thing. And so then what happens, the computer then actually changes the design. So the wings get changed a little bit. In another iteration, the engine may get changed, and then you get another flight. So you've got all the changes, and then what the computer does, it looks at all of the aircraft which have flown the furthest in the simulation, and takes those features and mixes them together. So the kind of the design of the plane is the kind of genetic code.
So it's sort of like machine learning.
Yeah, that's right, machine learning. And the idea is that the design will get better and better, but that has been a failure. It's not possible to use genetic algorithms on a whole aircraft. You can do it, say, with a wing or a turbine blade. In fact, it doesn't even work on a whole engine. It doesn't work because what's called the search space.
Too many variables.
Yeah, the search space is just too great, and that does lead into the energy problem, because you've got to run all these computer programs running on computers. They take energy. Computers take up a lot of energy. So that's an issue. That's an issue which is, I think, not been dealt with in evolutionary theory. That's the energy to run the whole show.
So that's the second article. So the first article, you focus on evolution and creativity. Can I just, before we jump onto the energy one, creativity, I thought that was quite interesting. You make the point that, and it's something we probably don't think about too often, and that is, I guess, where does creativity come from?
Yeah.
And I really liked the little statement you made here, and I'll just read it out. You say in the article that we tend to focus on the difference between God and us, which is understandable, you say, but you go on to talk about actually the similarities and some of the unique characteristics which we've got, which seems could only come from God himself.
Yeah, that's right. And to me, that really undermines the whole thesis of evolution. Evolution is all about randomness and sort of throwing everything up in the air and seeing what you get, so to speak. And God doesn't work that way. When you look at the Bible, it's all about careful design. You've got the law of Moses. Everything's sort of carefully structured, and things are just not left to random chance. Random processes lead to huge amounts of junk, and so it's not environmentally friendly, to use a kind of modern day concept. The entire universe would be filled with huge amounts of useless junk.
Well, actually, that's probably a good segue into the second one, which is the energy crisis. Yeah. And you start off with a subject very dear to my heart, and that is how tangled cables get when you throw them in a bag.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Could you share with us what tangled cables has to do with this conversation?
Yeah, that's right. As I say in the article, proteins in the body, which are literally like nets, but they look tangled, but they're meant to be tangled to do their job. Proteins have a precise shape.
They're not really tangled in the sense that it's random. They're actually combined in a particular way.
That's right, and it's got to be exactly right. And as I point out, it's not just if you've got 100 amino acids, you throw those 100 amino acids together and bang, that's it. Because you've got the 100 amino acids required from the protein, it will do its job. It's not. They've got to be in exactly the right sequence. And even if there's just one error can be near disaster. For example, in sickle cell anemia, there's only an error of one amino acid. And because we've got the absence of something called hydrogen bonding, which I'm particularly interested in from a work point of view, that's the stickiness of water, that's essential for maintaining the structure of proteins. And in the article, I make the argument, if an error of only one amino acid in the hemoglobin protein in one of the chains, if that leads to a very sick person. People with sickle cell anemia have a lot of problems. There's whole medical books on that subject. So how on earth did hemoglobin come about before that? Because before it was fully functioning, there'd be lots of errors, thousands of errors as it kind of evolves towards the ideal function of hemoglobin. So how on earth, how is it going to get there if there's a very, very low tolerance? Also in the article, I talk about insulin, and the allowance there is only 3 amino acids, and anything more, you haven't got proper insulin.
And on the subject of the tangling, when a cell splits, how the helix miraculously, if I can use that word, sort of untangles itself, if tangles are the right word, in order for the cell to split. Yeah,
that's right. So in DNA, the 3 million base pairs, there's a duplication, exact copy of the information. So all our cells have got 2 copies of the genetic code. And it's really ingenious the way it's constructed, where you've got the different types of amino acids. You've got adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. And cytosine always connects to guanine and adenine to thymine. And so they pair up. And that's how we get the duplicate genetic code. And then just prior to cell division, or when the cell divides, as you just said, the actual genetic code kind of it unzips itself. It's sort of it's like but literally, but maybe a zip actually is a good analogy. It's basically like 2 parts of a zip, and it gets unzipped. And because of that unique way that the 2 sets of amino acids come together, so that means when the 2 parts have unzipped, you've got a cytosine, and then what will happen? A guanine will come along, and that will stick to the cytosine. So it's almost like a natural assembly. So in other words, when you've got half of the genetic code, then there's only a certain way that it can be assembled. So basically, it will naturally self-assemble when you've got the amino acids there into the required sequence. So it really is quite incredible, and then that's passed down to the next generation.
Now you mentioned we mentioned it briefly before, the Miller-Urey experiment, where they actually did create some amino acids, but actually in so doing invites the discussion around the energy, which is what the second article is primarily about. Do you want to just tell us a bit about that?
So at the time, I think a lot of people thought, wow, this really proves evolution. But one thing I think I mentioned in the article, especially when dealing with evolutionary theory, we have to be cautious about extrapolation. In the article, I think I used the example that cows can jump, but no cow has ever been observed to jump over the moon. And they never will. It doesn't matter if the Earth is full of there's 1 billion cows on the Earth, a fun fact. And even if the entire universe was filled with Earths, each with 1 billion cows and a moon going around those Earths, it would never, ever be the case that a cow would jump over the moon. And that's what I think, that's, I suppose, where I go a bit further. As in the discussion before, Steve, you mentioned that we assume that if there is infinite time and resources, then anything would happen. Well, I actually take issue with that and say that isn't always the case. So it doesn't matter if we've got infinite number of Earths with an infinite number of moons and an infinite number of cows across the universe, cows are never going to be able to jump over the moon.
There's lots of problems with the cow jumping over the moon, that's for sure.
Yeah. So
and height is only just one of them.
Yeah. So I would say that evolutionary theory is full of cows jumping over the moon. In other words, you can't appeal to infinite time. It still won't work.
So in the Muller-Urey experiment, you talked about the energy that was provided by electric sparks in this sort of sludge or whatever they started with the original materials. And then you talked about the amount of energy that would be required to create something infinitely more complex than what they managed to achieve.
That's right. I was really quite surprised with the calculation. You can do a ballpark figure of the energy in a chemical reaction, and the ballpark figure which is used is something called 1 electron volt. Especially in physics, that's a unit of energy which is used as the energy where an electron goes through a potential difference of 1 volt. And a ballpark figure we use in physics, chemical reactions, 1 electron volt, and nuclear reactions, 1,000,000 electron volts. So we know how much energy is required for a simple chemical reaction. Now, with evolution, what's going to happen if it was true? You've got lots of assembling and disassembling going on at the same time because it's all random.
Right.
Often, you get the impression that evolution itself is intelligent because evolution does this, evolution did that. It's almost as if it's got a magic eye.
Like there's some intelligence or some knowledge built in.
Yeah. Oh, there's a good one. Yeah, we've got to keep that sequence of amino acids. We're going to need that for insulin. You
mentioned that when you're talking about the monkeys. Like, who's going to decide when you actually stumble across the IKEA mission statement? You need an intelligent person to decide that, hang on a tick, we've arrived at the mission statement. Let's stop right here.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right. So there's all these things which are not thought about, which you'd actually need. So I was really surprised at the calculation just how much energy is required. Now, over several years, I've taught astrophysics as a day job, stellar astrophysics, how the stars work, how energy is generated in the cores of stars by the fusion of hydrogen into helium, and it's possible to work out how much energy is being produced in the core of the sun. In fact, the solar power industry, people know how much energy is falling on a solar panel. Right. And so you imagine a great big sphere around the sun, and so you can calculate how much energy is coming out of the sun. And even all of the energy which has fallen on the Earth is minuscule compared to the amount that would be required even to start the beginning of evolution, if that was possible. It just doesn't work. To me, that is it's a fatal problem. And I think in evolutionary theory, I did come across a paper which I think I did reference in the article. The assumption is, the Earth has been around for 4.5 billion years, and therefore we can work out how much sunlight, how much solar energy has fallen on the Earth. And so that's our budget. That's the budget that we're dealing with now. And so the assumption is made, evolution has happened, and therefore the amount of energy which the sun has produced, that must be adequate for the purpose. It must have happened. So it's one of these circular arguments. But I thought, hang on a moment, when you do the actual calculations, it's a hopeless situation. I mean, just with insulin, there's not enough energy. And again, that is a hard limitations. I don't want to get into cosmology, but the observable universe, that is the extent of the universe that it's possible to observe from the Earth. This is to do with the speed of light, because you get a certain distance away from the Earth, and because of the expansion of space-time, the recession is greater than the speed of light. So light from beyond a certain limit can never reach
Right.
the Earth. And so the amount of energy in the observable universe, that's kind of a hard limit. So even though it's impossible for the energy from that vast
Yeah,
sphere
you can't
Earth,
garner that energy
yeah,
anyway.
you can't get any more than that. So to me, it really is. It's fatal to evolution, and the only way around it is actually to start going down the creation route. In the end, you've got God intervening in so many ways. Like I mentioned with the calculation. So the problem is you've got 20 amino acids which are used in the human body for life, 22 altogether for life, but there's 500 possible amino acids that can exist in nature, and I put the references in the article. And also in nature, just if you've got something like the Miller-Urey experiment producing all the different possible amino acids, that half of those are going to be right-handed and half are going to be left-handed. It's like molecules that are like a left and a right hand. They're identical to each other, but they're just structured in left and right hand versions of each other. So if you've got 500 naturally occurring amino acids, then half of those are going to be right-handed, half are going to be left. And another major problem, I think, for abiogenesis is the fact that all amino acids in life use left-handed amino acids. You see some quite interesting explanations as to why that should be. But if you've got this primeval soup, then what is it? What's going to separate just left and right amino acids? So even Steve, in that calculation I did, I assumed there was some miraculous way there would only be left-handed amino acids. There would only be the 20 amino acids required for life, and then also there's some way that evolution could see which are the good combinations, that somehow it can go through all these different permutations, and then the kind of magic eye, select out what's required for life. And then the problem gets even more serious when you realize there's between 80,000 and 400,000 proteins which are part of the human organism. So it just the problem's impossible even with amino acid. So even with that is an impossible situation. Then you've got thousands of proteins. You've got enzymes, which are special proteins for enhancing or speeding up chemical reactions. And just the enzymes themselves is an amazing thing. How did they themselves evolve? They're essential for life. So I can also say, in doing this study, it's made me even more of an unbeliever in evolution. I've gone the other way. So my scientific research is, just looking at this, I'm kind of, I've been going in a reverse direction to evolution and atheism.
Much of what you're saying is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And obviously you're just sort of picking around the edges almost, you can just tell. There's just so much complexity here.
Yeah.
And yet none of this is ever spoken about. If you're talking to anyone about evolution, someone in work, someone in the street, nobody understands the complexity. Everyone just assumes that, the scientists have all worked it out, that evolution works and they know how it happened. This is sort of this urban myth that evolution is all sorted.
Yeah.
And of course, what I'm hearing from you is not even close. In fact, it seems impossible virtually that it could even possibly happen.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And also one thing I think is particularly exciting, I think with the advent of quantum computers, it may be possible to demonstrate that abiogenesis is not possible. And that actually throw in a real spanner in the works. And I think what happened, people will be forced to start going down intelligent design. People postulate sort of like creation fields that enable amino acids to naturally develop into the proteins required for life. But then, to my mind, that's creation.
Thanks very much for sharing with Wilderness Conversations.
Thanks.